welcome. A really warm welcome to you all this afternoon. We're delighted that you can join us for this final session of our Centenary weekend. Some of you are here in person, and it's lovely to see the chapel so full this afternoon. And some of you are with us online, and it's lovely that you can join us as well. Some of you have travelled through the whole weekend, and some of you are here just for today. In this session, we're going to focus on one family in particular, the Bendy family. And it's so good that Ali Bendy has been part of our face-to-face group here at Othona this weekend. Ali's family has had long and close connections with the first community based here. Her great aunt, Miss Harriet Evelyn Bendy, was known as Sister Evelyn St. Paul, for around 20 years, and she has a plaque on the wall here in the chapel. And alongside her on the plaque is her nephew, Alan, and he became head gardener here in the late 1930s. Those of us who've been here for the weekend have already heard from his brother John, Ali's father, in some of our earlier sessions. And we begin this afternoon with John's memories of how his family first became involved here. We will also hear from Evelyn and Alan and members of the community in their own words, mainly through letters and diary entries. So let's hand over to John to begin, bearing in mind that he wrote this in the 1980s, and he was remembering events that happened over 50 years before that.
Hi. The embryo of my link with what is now Othona was conceived in the kitchen of the Bendy home in Cardiff in 1929, when I was 10 years old. My father announced, with some misgivings, that Auntie Evelyn, his sister, would soon be leaving Cardiff to join a religious community in Dorset, called the Community of Christian Contemplatives. Auntie Evelyn lived within walking distance, and we often visited her on Sunday afternoons to be cocooned by her warmth and love, and fed on homemade cakes and tea. A.E., as she signed herself to in letters, was always a seeker after truth, and at that time was into Christian Science. The prospect for us of being denied our Sunday visits was partly relieved when our father told us that the community lived by the sea, overlooking the Chesil beach.
The earliest mention so far found of Evelyn Bendy in the warden, Miss Curtis's writing, comes in her daybook in an entry made on October the 25th, 1931, when she is noting a number of new inquiries about living here.
Miss Bendy, another new one, has taken Eve's end hut for a year to practice self-support on the land.
The family's link with Auntie Evelyn was mainly by letter until 1932. However, father had visited A.E. when down south on business and had come back with glowing reports. Although I have to admit that for him, the glow was mainly derived from the geographical rather than the theological attributes of A.E.'s situation. We were told that the sisters wore white habits down to their ankles and headdresses akin to those of biblical times. In spite of that, Auntie Evelyn was typically enthusiastic and happy about her new lifestyle, and my father's rather cynical doubts about his sister's search for the straight and narrow were at least suspended pending further investigations. My mother, brother, and I could hardly wait for our first visit, but at last, one sunny Sunday morning in 1932, we saw from our ancient open-topped humber the golden bow of Chesil Bank, the blue sea edged with white, and Portland Bill in the distance. We gasped with delight, and even now, after 56 years, that site still thrills me as much as it did then. The landmark of the community was the house itself, standing rather out of context in what was then an almost treeless area, with a few small cottages and huts on the hillside. On arrival at the entrance marked Burton Mere, we were met by several sheep. We were welcomed by their guardians, the warden's nieces. At the bottom of a steeply sloping path, we found End Hut, which had been Auntie Evelyn's home for over 2 years. We had a joyful reunion and were shown around the premises, a process which required very little time. The door at the east end opened into a small living room, and at the far end was an even smaller bedroom. No kitchen, no bathroom, no running water, no gas, no electricity. The toilet was a bucket, plus a box of soil parked in a little tent outside. Cooking and lighting were by paraffin, and extra heating in the winter was by hot water bottles of great variety. For my elder brother Alan and me, in our early teens, this was idyllic, being so far removed from the norm. As there were no tall trees, the view southwards was of the whole sweep of Chesil Bank, from Portland Bill to Burton Bradstock, with Golden Cap and Lyme Regis to the west. In the foreground, behind the bank of golden pebbles, was Burton Mere, which at that time was largely open water, as the reeds were harvested for thatching. The walk to the beach was through uncultivated scrub and woodland, interspersed with patches of grass, with molehills, anthills, and an abundance of animals, birds, and reptiles. One of my most vivid memories is of the astonishing number of snakes to be seen on many occasions when we walked to the beach. I've only seen 2 in recent years. On our first visit, we were enchanted with all that we had heard and seen of life in the community, and we resolved to make frequent visits to discover more about their ways of silence and faith and simple living. But this was not to be, yet.
Sadly, John and Alan's father became ill and died the following year. John was still at school and Alan had begun training in horticulture at the Somerset Farm Institute at Cannington near Bridgewater. Their mother returned to teaching, and as they no longer had a car, visits were not possible for a while. John takes up the story again.
During his time at Cannington, Alan bought a motorcycle which enabled him to make occasional visits to Burton Bradstock, and he became more and more interested in all aspects of the life of the community, and particularly the teaching of Adela Curtis, the warden. Almost all the vegetables were grown on site, but the heavy clay soil made cultivation by hand very hard work for the sisters, some of whom were neither young nor accustomed to such work. Because of this difficulty, a young married couple were employed to take responsibility for the heavy gardening activities. And shortly after they left the community in 1935, Alan agreed, on completion of the 2 years course in horticulture, to take over as gardener and to study the contemplative teaching of Adela Curtis.
By November 1938, preparations were underway for Alan to move to the community, as Alan himself notes in this letter to Auntie Evelyn. In it, he also mentions a visit he and his mother and brother made to their Uncle Harold, Evelyn's older brother.
Farringdon, November the 1st. Dear Auntie, no doubt you know the arrangements which have been made and about which I'm very happy. I had a letter from the warden yesterday stating all details, and I wondered hard whether an answer were necessary, but came to the conclusion that I ought to acknowledge it, and I have done so. We went to Ledbury last Saturday afternoon. I met the others there, my mother and brother John. Uncle Harold is exactly the same, but cousin Alice is finding it hard to move around. Says it takes her an hour to get to bed, she cannot bend. Cheerful though. We had quite a pleasant tea party. I suppose you have moved into the house by now. Please do not spend too long doing out the hut. I can sort out the oddments in the cupboard and eat the edible ones. In haste, love from Alan.
Early entries in Adela Curtis's diary for 1939 note Alan's arrival.
Sunday, 1st January 1939. Yesterday, Alan Bendy arrived as resident gardener and student to live in the end hut, dine daily at Community House, attend lectures and noon and evening services, and draw a salary of 37 shillings and sixpence a week. Monday, 2nd January, took Brother Alan, Sister Mary and Sister Margaret round gardens from 3:30 to 4:30, explaining management and arranging that Hayward and Hussey, for 2 days a week only, work on the air raid shelter. Members in house to keep the rule of 2 hours garden work daily under Brother Alan, who will be responsible.
Alan had been in the community a week when he received an overnight visit from his family. His mother, Elizabeth, or Beth Bendy, had her mother, Barbara Ann Briggs, living with her and John in their house in Bristol. Miss Curtis notes in her diary.
Sunday, 8th January, gave the lecture easily. Gave Alan a ministry afterwards. He is promising. His mother, brother and grandmother of 83 motored from Bristol yesterday, spent the night here and left at 2, saying they hope to come once a month for weekends. Are quite happy about Alan being here.
During his first month, Alan is busy ordering and planting trees and trying to oversee the building of the air raid trench shelter. True to their word, his family arrive for a weekend in February. His grandmother, who now knows that the community meals are mainly vegetables and nuts, comes prepared with her own preferred food.
Saturday, 11th of February, Alan's mother, grandmother and brother drove over from Bristol to stay the night in Garden Hut, which they like very much. All lunching at house, except the old lady of 80-odd, who prefers a ham sandwich and brings it with her. The brother slept in Alan's spare bed.
John Bendy takes up the story once again.
Alan's gardening expertise proved of great value, and as no artificial fertilizers were used, the production of compost was very important. I believe the method recommended by the warden had been developed for Indian villages, and ingredients included not only garden and kitchen waste, but also that of community members. Alan became very keen on this aid to good plant husbandry and developed an over-enthusiastic desire to give me a conducted tour of his heaps, hoping to kindle in me a similar approbation. Having suffered the experience one hot summer's day, I had to agree that the finished product was excellent compost and resulting crops extremely well nourished, but I held on to my earlier reservations about the supply and handling of one of the important ingredients.
We get the impression that Alan was enjoying living in the community. But sadly, his time here was cut short because of the outbreak of war, and in 1940, he joined the RAF.
In his time with the community, Alan had learnt a great deal from the warden about Christian meditation, which helped him to cope with the ever-present dangers of life as aircrew in the RAF. In his wartime letters, home and to others, he often spoke of the enormous help he received from the warden's interpretation of the Christian message.
Two of Alan's letters from April 1941 have survived. The first is addressed to an American couple, Carl and Julia Vrooman, who had had a long association with Adela Curtis and her communities over the years.
From Sergeant W.A. Bendy, 1152038, care of 46 Fanshawe Road, Bristol. It's a difficult task to write a letter containing practically nothing of my doings, of our events and usual items of news, but I do so want to let you know that we are all alive and kicking, and in fact, cheerful and eager to fight the great fight. So I will make the attempt. I know well that Mr. Censor will eliminate all items of interest to the enemy. And so the news that escapes through the sieve of our combined efforts and crosses the somewhat perilous seas in safety will seem quite flat for these exciting times. You will be able to read between the lines and see that we have no difficulty about keeping our chins up. And I can speak as one who has been in the thick of Jerry's most determined blitz. It's curious that I must needs go on leave to be in the thick of the fight, as yet. Training is not yet complete. Mother, whom one would not expect to be a likely type to stand frequent and not distant bombing, is well and still at school, though half the place was burned and quite a few windows went west in a later raid. John is at his usual work and is also a home guard. When last at home in Bristol, a couple of 500-pound bombs of high explosive fell about 15 yards from the old homestead in the front street. The roof was shattered, but no windows were broken, and we hardly lost any furniture. I patched up the roof in a day, and so we need not move yet. Nobody was hurt, though there were some miraculous escapes. A baby in a pram 2 doors away had rocks on the pram, and yet did not even wake up. I wonder whether you can imagine us all in the shelter when not on duty. The Anderson shelters are first class, and we're glad we have one, and so are the next door neighbours who join us when things get hot. I use the word spirit in order to transmute the thrill of nervous energy aroused by the sound of a bomb whistling down, and find it very successful. If only every one of us would use the beautiful law of transmutation instead of trying repression. I was down at Burton for a couple of hours a month ago. The warden was on her quarterdeck and all were well. I saw Sister Margaret and Mr. Rolls, as well as Sister Evelyn. You will have had letters from them, unless they were censored or sunk. They have plenty of vegetables and were well away in the store line and are hard at it, cultivating the old garden. Apart from being machine gunned from a Jerry plane, which did no damage, they have not been molested. The days are getting longer once again, and spring, that time of hope, is on the way. We are full of hope and eagerness, and whatever comes in 1941, we are ready to meet it. And getting more united at every fresh onslaught, we too press on towards the goal of victory. Yet we are a long way from learning our lesson, and the church has yet to wake up to point out the only way of peace. There are signs, though, and a page in our local paper at home after the first big raid was a real indication of a great awakening to come. It was signed by the Lord Mayor and prominent citizens, and it was about morale. It recommended a quiet time in which to listen to God, to be kept by everyone early each morning in order to receive a steadying power and inward peace. I sent it to the warden, and I think it made us all rejoice. As you will notice, I am a sergeant now. There are advantages and things against. The food, though not better, is served up in a daintier manner. We even rub them to tablecloths. I have not put my address down, as it would undoubtedly be blue penciled, and also is not permanent. Not that any address can be called permanent nowadays. The phrase, as safe as houses, is very out of date in one sense. We take the dog out for his constitutional around Crater Walk. Life in the service has been worth trying, interesting, and quite enjoyable so far. The tough parts are yet to come. I am developing my faith and asking for power each and every day that I may do my duty to God and man. I hope to survive, and yet it's not a craving within me, for I know that mere death of the body is nothing. Also, it's a remarkable illustration of the well-known law. I note with interest that folks are losing those things they cherished most. Homes in some cases, money, husbands, etc. How dangerous to be possessed by anything. I am glad to note the extensive ploughing being carried out, especially in some parts of the country. Yet the growing of food at home takes second place to convoying grain, etc., across the oceans. The land will eventually be properly mobilized. I could almost wish I was pulling my weight there. So many can do the flying in aircraft, so few can interest themselves in the cultivation of vegetables, let alone have the knowledge behind them for the growing thereof. However, I have chosen, and I'm young. It's right that I should be in one of the most perilous of jobs. Well, I wish both of you all the very best, and may God give you health, joy, and peace. Mother, Grandma, and John send their greetings, as do I. From Alan Bendy. P.S. Grandma is up in the north, out of raid areas, thank goodness.
The second letter from Alan is to Adela Curtis, the warden herself. Again, written in April 1941.
Dear Warden, I attempted to send Easter greetings by letter, but this marvellous weather means that we are flying long hours and are surprisingly tired when we finish the day, so even urgent correspondence has been left. We worked Good Friday, Saturday and Sunday, but I managed to partake of Holy Communion at Hornsey Parish Church on Sunday morning. I realise that it is essential to keep up my practice of meditation, even more important than gunnery or the many other jobs we have to master. So I make time for mind training and studies. Thus, I can say I have started the Divine Law of the Body, a copy of which you were thoughtful enough to send me, and am enjoying and digesting it. Thank you very much for writing it, and for having me in mind when you dished out the copies. In a month's time, we expect to start on operations against the enemy, and we're eager to do so. I have a very good crew, the pilot being a New Zealander and the observer a Cornishman. We get on well with each other and are becoming more efficient each day. We shall be in time for the Battle of the Atlantic. This part of the training is very enjoyable, perhaps because it is such hard work. Last Wednesday, we spent 7.5 hours in the air, most of it over the sea. 90% of the time, I was transmitting or receiving on the wireless. It's good to be able to face the fact that we are walking through the valley of the shadow, even more in a warplane than on the ground, and yet to be able to be cheerful in the knowledge that God is with us always. A meditation I used just now is, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. and everyone needs that knowledge now, more than ever. Also, when successful at my exercises, and I have been pretty good, I use, "Of myself I can do nothing, but in Christ I can do all things." So I redirect the pride that comes before a fall. One of my friends crashed and was killed last week while on exercise. I volunteered to go in that kite, but had already passed that exercise. Just one instance. Well, I have to get into communication with a motorboat from the air shortly, so must go. Sunday morning has a recognizable atmosphere, even when everyone is working. Those who can be spared, or who cannot manage to escape, go on church parade. But how few see the good of it. Let us hope the grinding down process won't be too prolonged. May you and all those at Burton know health and peace. From Alan Bendy.
That was quite probably the last letter that Alan wrote.
In April 1941, Alan was reported missing on a flight over the North Sea, and nothing was ever heard of the plane or crew.
A series of moving letters were written at this time. Sister Evelyn enclosed Alan's last letter to the warden in her letter to Beth and John, Alan's mother and brother. And this is Evelyn's letter to them. The Garden Hut, 28th of April, 1941. My dearest Beth and John, I felt like you, I could cry and cry, but at the same time, I can rejoice that our dear lad is lifted up out of the turmoil and filth of war. His hands are saved from the horror of killing his fellow men, and he made his sacrifice consciously and willingly. He had reached the heights with clean hands and a pure heart. Let us thank God that he gave you so sweet a son, and me so dear a godson. Yes, we can bear it and carry on. The warden sent me a note, and the enclosed letter from Alan, which was probably the last one he wrote. I missed you yesterday, and the day was dull and cold, but I did not expect you could spare the petrol. Come as soon as you can. It will be a comfort. I have not seen Margaret yet. She has gone to Bridport this morning. Sister Mary took your letter and left it in the warden's porch. She wrote at once, asking me to send the letter to you to keep. My love to you both, and the peace of God be with you and our darling boy. Ever yours, Auntie Evelyn. P.S. I've made a copy of Alan's letter. I want Harold to see it someday. Have not been able to write to anyone yet. Sister Elizabeth, a long-term member of the community, was staying in Worthing at this time and wrote to Evelyn when she heard the news.
Worthing, 3rd of May, 1941. My dear Evelyn, I heard from Sister Margaret that our dear Alan was missing, and now Sister Mary gives me the certain news. You know we all love him. He was one of the best students the warden ever had. I might even say the best. He is our link with heaven. One more. I was thankful to learn from Mary that you were very steady. Give my love to Beth and John. A few more years shall roll, and we shall all meet again, and sorrow and sighing shall be done away. Your work in the gardens will be doubly precious to you now. Everything to remind you of the glorious resurrection. You are not one to drag him down with the natural human grief for your loss, because you know and believe that he has ascended into heaven, but is not cut off from you three who love him so dearly. Into thy hands, O Lord, we commend his spirit and our souls, for this is life eternal, to know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. I have often thought of your story of the little darling sticking up for the puppy. He didn't do it a purpose. That was characteristic of his subsequent life. Always the wise, charitable view and no resentment. God keep you, dear Evelyn. Much love, Elizabeth.
And a letter to Alan's mother from Adela Curtis, the warden.
Christian Contemplatives Charity, May 28th. Dear Mrs. Bendy, I thank you very much for so kindly letting me see Alan's letter to you. Such a letter as any mother must thank God for. When these young men make the great sacrifice, they leave us an example to encourage us through these dark days and make us more than ever determined that their supreme self-offering shall never be in vain for the good of mankind. When I lie awake, night after night, hearing the planes roar overhead, with the thud of delayed action bombs shaking our little wooden cottages, I realise more sharply than ever the nobility of our British and Allied airmen. And I pray that I may be worthy of them and of all their comrades in sea and land who are fighting the good fight of truth, righteousness, justice, freedom and peace. Victory is sure, but we have much yet to learn and suffer before we are fit to serve as God's agents in establishing his kingdom on earth as in heaven. It's a comfort to join the daily service of intercession by the BBC at 10:15 and strengthen the hands of all the fine men who are leading us through our time of death and resurrection as a commonwealth of nations for the service of humanity. May you and your whole family be kept in the love and power of God. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, because he trusteth in thee. This is one of my good companions in the night hours of trial. Yours most sincerely, A.M. Curtis.
Sad times for Alan's family and the community. Sister Evelyn remained here for the rest of the war, and in 1945 was involved in a dramatic life and death incident. Let's hear from Evelyn herself as she writes to her brother Harold to let him know why it has taken her so long to mend his shirt.
Green Hill, Burton Bradstock. My dear Harold, I'm so long doing your shirt and I'm so sorry, but hope it'll go on for a bit now. I was just going to pack it up yesterday when a plane crashed in the field opposite. We all went out to see, and an airman was limping about in pain with his hands burnt and saying, "There's another in the plane." it was in flames and I had to go round some barbed wire and over a little wall to get to him. But I got there first and the flames were blowing away from me. So I tugged and tugged and he said, pull again, in a quiet, controlled voice. Then pull again, it's loosening. And he began to heave himself up a bit. And just after, up came the others. And I said, come on, Rogers. One more try and out he came, one boot off and a bare foot with several toes burned. We all dragged him away as far as we could and a miraculous car drove by. A stretcher was found from our chapel and off they both went to hospital at Bridport and are in good health as far as we know. There have been Air Force boys here all night and I had to cook eggs and bacon for their breakfast this morning. So missed the post again to you. They were minding a hole in the road sort of job. A flare set off St. Margaret's Field. It was on fire. So we had to run about and get things to stamp that out. It was a busy day. But we got the boy, Warrant Officer Brown, bless him, love from Evelyn.
The pilot was Warrant Officer Ralph Brown, and he was flying a martinet when the crash happened. I want us to continue with Evelyn's story just now, but later we'll come back to Ralph Brown because we have his daughter with us in the chapel today. For now, we must catch up with a reporter from the Dorset Daily Echo who interviewed Evelyn a few months after the rescue.
If at some time in the near future you read of a nun in a white cloak attending an investiture at Buckingham Palace, the name will almost certainly be that of Miss Harriet Evelyn Bendy, BEM, of the Christian Contemplative Charity, Burton near Burton Bradstock. Today, the Echo interviewed this elderly heroine. The impression that Miss Bendy is a woman of character was amply confirmed. A reporter had to explain to her what the British Empire Medal meant and was surprised to learn that he, and not the authorities, was giving her the first news of the award. It happened about 10:20 a.m. a month or two ago when Miss Bendy and the rest of the sisters of the little religious community were trooping in to participate in the morning service broadcast by the BBC. The peace of Burton Mere was disturbed by a dreadful crash. Miss Bendy wasted no time. Wearing her gardening clothes and plimsolls, she dashed through a hail of flying debris, over a low wall and under some barbed wire into the field. Clambering onto the brazen fuselage, Miss Bendy grabbed the pilot with both arms and, urged on by him, she began a frantic tug of war against time. Exploding Very cartridges added a fresh hazard to the intense heat, but Miss Bendy had got the pilot almost to a standing position when additional help came from Mr. Levi Rogers, a jobbing gardener who had followed her into the field. You see, Miss Bendy explained simply, I happened to get there first. The last pull succeeded and the pilot had sufficient presence of mind to say to his rescuers, drag me away. They pulled him to a safe distance and a few moments later, the plane was just a tangled mass of white hot debris. Miss Bendy, one would imagine, had done enough, but it was she who rushed to the phone for medical aid, only to find that the crashing plane had carried the wires away. after a passing car had taken the injured men to hospital, she completed her morning of activity by taking a broom from the garden shed and, with Mr. Rogers, who has since been commended by the King for his bravery, beat out a fire that was spreading over the field and threatening property. "You must have been very exhausted," the Echo suggested to Miss Bendy. "No," she replied with engaging frankness, "I felt most exhilarated." "Gardening," she explained, "had made her a very strong woman. I came here 14 years ago and I've been working in the garden here ever since." Rather nervously, the Echo invited Miss Bendy to state her age. She replied without hesitation, "I was 67 when this happened and I am 68 today." A friend who heard Miss Bendy tell her story said to the Echo reporter, "It is a masterpiece of understatement. She had burns and she was smothered in blood."
One of Sister Evelyn's hopes had been that she could receive her British Empire Medal from the King at Buckingham Palace. But as John Bendy notes,
the investiture was cancelled, due, I believe, to the poor health of King George, so it was left to the post office to do the honours.
Letter addressed to Miss Harriet E. Bendy, BEM, 4th of September 1946. Buckingham Palace. I greatly regret that I am unable to give you personally the award which you have so well earned. I now send it to you with my congratulations and my best wishes for your future happiness. George, R.I.
Mother and I kept in touch with the community throughout the war, and in 1947, I took my wife-to-be, Elaine, to meet Auntie Evelyn in the end hut. She welcomed us, as ever, with open arms, and 3 months later was at our wedding. In the spring of the following year, I was very ill with measles, and Elaine and I were allowed to spend a week in a bungalow in the community grounds called St. Columba for me to recuperate. Had it not happened to us, we would not have believed it possible to be really fed up with the song of nightingales. But when a veritable chorus of those glorious songsters keeps on and on, all through the evening and well into the night, and starts up again at dawn, it becomes a beautiful source of irritation. Would that even one little nightingale could be heard now.
Sister Evelyn had been an active member of the community for almost 20 years. She left probably in 1950, and the family understands that she went to live in Ledbury, Herefordshire, with her brother Harold and cousin Alice, who by this time was 90 years of age. A final letter in our series expresses fondness and concern for Evelyn by Margaret, one of the remaining sisters in the community.
Community House, 1st of October 1950. On retreat for 1 week. My dear Sister Evelyn, I have been thinking of you so much and meaning to write to you, but have been too tired to do anything extra. I feel sure you are tired too. Well, here we are in the beginning of our retreat, and so I am staying in bed until late in the morning, and then I think the warden is expecting to give us a ministry together. I enclose this lovely matchless pearl sent by Dr. Morden. The warden thinks it is the best of all. Sister Marion went for a holiday last Tuesday, And Sister Hannah goes tomorrow for 5 nights to her sisters who are not well. Now, Evelyn dear, write and tell me how you are. I am taking you every day in my early morning intercession, and we always take you in the services. Perhaps one day you will come back. I expect your work, although tiring, is keeping you concentrated. God bless you, and with love, from Sister Margaret.
Both Harold, aged 80, and Alice, aged 95, died in 1955. Evelyn died in 1961 at the age of 83. By this time, the community here had come to an end with the death of the warden, Adela Curtis, the last remaining person living on site. Let's finish as we started with words from John.
Although in my youth I did not consider myself to be religiously inclined, the fact that my aunt and brother, whom I loved and respected, undoubtedly derived so much that was good and helpful from the warden's teaching, made me think more seriously about the faith in which I had been brought up. After being out of touch with the original community for about 30 years, I was on my way from Abbotsbury to Bridport following my wife's death in 1981. As I passed the entrance to Othona, I had a sudden, very strong feeling that I must go back and find out what happened to the community. I reversed up the hill and drove very cautiously down the rough, gloomy drive, shrouded by the huge macrocarpa trees. Peter, the warden, answered the door, invited me in, and we had a chat, during which he suggested I might like to visit Othona. I knew then that I would. On my way out, Sylvia, Peter's wife and co-warden, was coming in, and we said hello and goodbye. So there I was again, with my memories of some of the happiest days of my life. And now, at Othona, they are back with me, under new management.
Well, I'd like to thank my fellow players, Ali and Andy and Claire and Tony and Lou, who helped to make this, well, a wonderful event for me. So I hope it was for you as well, all of you listening. So I mentioned during that performance that Ralph Brown's daughter is in the audience with us here in the chapel, Sylvia. And I was wondering, Sylvia, if you wanted to say anything, or I know that you've brought your father's logbook, and you're wearing his RAF wings, aren't you?
Yes. So my 2 half brothers and my half sister, we're all so just blown over and just so grateful to Sister Evelyn for what she did.
Yes.
None of us, I don't think, realised the extent of what it was at the time.
Yeah.
And it's been really emotional.
Yeah.
But my sister is named after Sister Evelyn.
Really?
She is Diane Evelyn.
Ah.
And she had 2 christening spoons from Sister Evelyn, one of which she uses every day.
Really?
So she's always in her thoughts, I'm sure.
Yes.
So.
And I did read somewhere that that Evelyn was concerned that Ralph might have lost his foot, and she hoped that he wouldn't have. But what happened to Ralph?
He was taken to hospital. He then eventually had his leg amputated just below the knee, but it never healed.
Oh.
Apparently he had ulcers on it all the time.
Oh.
Pieces of bone were always coming through.
Mm.
But he never complained. And he had almost like a wooden leg with a leather corset that kept it on.
Mm.
And even though the family wanted to get him something that was far lighter and far easier for him to manage, he wouldn't do it.
Ah.
He stuck with what he was given.
Yeah, I guess he was used to it, perhaps.
He used to apparently whittle away at it to make it comfortable.
Oh,
Every time he had a new one, he'd whittle away.
oh dear.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yes. So, but he lived to a grand age of 90.
Wow.
And he died in a hospital in Blackpool. He died of sepsis, which was just so unfortunate.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yes, he had a good life.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming and for sharing your story. Well done. So we're going to say goodbye now. Thank you so much for joining us on Zoom, and we're so thrilled that you've been with us for the weekend.
Just before we say goodbye, what's this?
Rose.
By any other name.
Explain.
So, okay, Liz, this is
Yes.
a gift from
Oh.
a lot of us that have participated this weekend.
Oh,
We think you've gone above and beyond and given so much passion and so much dedication to bringing Adela alive for all of us. So thank you very, very much.
oh, that's beautiful. It's lovely, and they smell beautiful. I'm really overwhelmed. Thank you so much. So, shall we say goodbye? Bye, everyone.
Bye bye, everyone.